Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Andrew. This video forms part of a series on Agile software design, where I'm discussing how design relates to Agile software development practices. In this video, I want to discuss why design is important in achieving agility. When we carry out software development, there are multiple parties who have an interest in the outcome. The stakeholders. Let's simplify this as the company, the employees who carry out the work, and the customer. The company needs to make a profit, and as such they need return on investment on the software development taking place. Development is not cheap. In order to help achieve that, they want efficiency from its workers, high productivity, so that the development is cost effective. That can drive revenue growth. Employees are a complex bunch in the mix. They may want different things from the company. They're likely to want the company to succeed, but they also want job satisfaction and future growth of themselves. They probably want far more than that. The customer expects privacy in dealings with the company. It's not something they ask for, they just expect it. They also want software that achieves their goal, and along the way they want value for money in making use of the software. Sometimes it can feel like the different goals of the various stakeholders can pull us in different directions. Continuous improvement means that we're constantly seeking the best balance of these concerns. Our goal is to identify working practices that can achieve the best for everyone. In my experience, design is an important part of the mix, but somewhat underappreciated. Design always happens, but not always with intent. As I mentioned in my last video, design is about organising and structuring our application so that we can work with it in the future. Intentionally undertaking design and structuring it in such a way that we can continue to change it helps us to achieve the balance we seek. Let's consider some examples of why. Perhaps one of the most important reasons for doing design comes down to money. In companies' terms, this is return on investment. The company needs us to work in an efficient and effective manner throughout the life of a software development project. Software development is not cheap. I want to refer you to someone else's work in this. A gent by the name of Rainsberger did a talk at DevTernity 2018 called The Economics of Software Design. He's done a really excellent presentation which covers this point really well, including calculus. He does a good job of showing graphs that explain the point here, which is that constant velocity, consistency of velocity throughout a software project is achieved through ensuring your code is maintainable and that it's organised in such a way that you can find the things that you need to work on, understand how they work, and be able to change them in the future. I highly recommend watching that video. The point he makes is really that there is a problem in the sense that just diving in and doing coding in the very early days can feel like it's more effective, more productive, and that there is a payback period to doing some form of design. But if we can make that payback period really short, then maybe that's less of a concern. I want to show you that in the next video, but let's carry on where we are, talking about why first. So if we organise our code, there are a number of benefits for a number of those stakeholders. For the company, it's that return on investment. If we can ensure that we can continue to make changes and add features to our software in such a way that the company is getting the best out of the people that are working on the software, then that's got to be a benefit. The employees see greater success of the company that way, and they may find that it's easier to continue with the project as time goes on. And the customer benefits from getting value for money because somehow the software was made more cost effective over time by doing design. And they also achieve more features that may help them achieve their goals better. Design is also a plan of action. We can think of it as thinking about what we're going to build before we build it. Thinking up front has some benefits. You may have heard the phrase, planning prevents poor performance. I think that's quite true. There's a benefit in thinking about what we're going to do before diving in and doing it. What thinking first allows us to do is identify issues earlier in a task. It might be that if we dive into the code, we might think that we know how it's going to turn out, how the change is going to work out. But it might be that we come across a problem late on in doing that development task, which we hadn't thought about because we hadn't done any upfront thinking about all the knock-on effects of what the change might result in. Identifying issues earlier allows a team to tackle them sooner. If someone can come within a day or two of the start of a sprint and say, I have a problem with this, I've realised that this change is not as easy as I thought it would be, then the team has an opportunity to do something about that, whether that's by putting more resource into it, by deciding that the task is perhaps one to delay and take out of the sprint, or by talking to one another and helping the problem there and then. There's another benefit to thinking about stuff first as well, and that's that it allows us to focus on different things at different times. If you've ever tried rubbing your stomach and patting your head at the same time, you might know that it's not all that straightforward. We're not particularly good at doing different things at the same time. Thinking about what we're doing and actually doing the coding, because they're at different levels, if we can separate those out, that might help us. Doing design as a result of thinking up front makes the development task easier because you've already got a plan of what you are going to do and you know what you need to do as part of that development. So it can actually make the development part of it easier as well. This all helps with our efficiency. This benefits employees because they've got a greater chance of ongoing success. The company, again, is getting that efficiency out of us. We're not running into roadblocks which are affecting delivery timescales. And the customer is getting that value and their features as they wanted. Next is security and compliance, a big topic. Customers deserve privacy. They expect us to protect their data. That is just a given. When they use our system, they assume that we are trustworthy. Otherwise, they wouldn't use us. Companies are also expecting us to be professional and to comply with any regulations that are in place. You might even say that society expects us to be professional. Unfortunately, we're not doing too well. As you can see from this graph, which is a plot of the number of software vulnerabilities reported by year, it's looking like we're not doing a very good job. This is looking very exponential. Other than possibly 2021, which looks like a downtick, doesn't it? Maybe the problem is finally solved and in 2021 we know that we're not going to start making these mistakes anymore. Unfortunately, if you look at 2019, that may also suggest the same thing. And furthermore, we've got some more evidence. The OWASP Top 10 for the first time in 2021 includes a new item, AO4 2021, which is insecure design. It's been recognised that this is so important that it should make onto the OWASP Top 10. There's a really good example of this, and it's one of many examples, and that's a change that we heard about recently to Cosmos DB. I think it was earlier in 2021. Microsoft made a change because they wanted to be able to use Cosmos DB as a source of information for, I think it was Jupyter notebooks. And what they did was they introduced an authentication bypass to allow that feature to work. At least this is my understanding. Unfortunately, that went wrong, and that alternative authentication method failed and resulted in lots of Cosmos DB databases with this feature turned on, vulnerable and open on the web. So even Microsoft, all the excellent developers that they have, can make this mistake, and that might be because of the process that they follow. Microsoft publish a thing called the Secure Development Lifecycle, and then there was an updated version called the Agile Secure Development Lifecycle. So they publish recommendations on how people should work, including how they work. You can see that Microsoft do design because they use GitHub, and so they're actually visible to us. But the problem with GitHub is that it's not encouraging them to think about security as part of each individual task. Maybe what we need is a tool that helps us do that. As an industry, we need to solve this problem of security being a concern. We need to do it before the regulators do. I want to point you again at someone else's work. Uncle Bob Martin, someone you may have heard of, did a talk. He's done it multiple times, but the one I recommend is in Goto 2017, called The Scribe's Oath, where he talks about how important software is becoming in society and how it's going to be necessary for regulation to be done. There's going to be legislation which is going to tighten up on how software can be developed, because the impacts on society, the potential impacts, are becoming greater all the time. That's going to become more and more of an issue as time goes on. And so we can expect that legislation will come. What we need to do is to identify a way of working that helps solve the problems before the legislation comes. Otherwise, it won't be in our control, and the solution may not be very appropriate. It might be very difficult for us to deal with what is suggested, what is recommended, what is legislated. GDPR is something we've seen in Europe. The General Data Protection Regulation was introduced as legislation in order to try and enforce some regulation into how personal information is handled, with the purpose being to reduce the likelihood that people's personal information can be exposed. GDPR is only really the first step. We can expect more regulation as time goes on. GDPR, as I mentioned, is about protecting people's personal information, and it requires organisations to have processes in place to manage risk. The risk that personal information might be leaked or exposed in a way that is inappropriate. And that applies to development too. Development is one of the riskier things that a company can be involved in. So if you work for a company, then you are a risk to that company because you're working in a way that could introduce risk to the company, to the employees of the company, and to the customer who's using the software. GDPR not only requires us to have processes, but it includes a principle called accountability, for which it's necessary to keep evidence of activities that prove compliance to GDPR. So not only do we have to have processes in place that manage risk, but we need to evidence them. We need to be able to prove that we did those processes. Now, you don't have to do that as part of design. No one says, there's nothing in GDPR that says that design is the solution to that problem for development teams. And indeed, there are plenty of other ways of doing it. There are all sorts of processes you might put in place, but a lot of them are about solving the problem after the fact. And indeed, if you read the Microsoft Agile software development lifecycle, that's one of the things they do, is they sort of do brainstorming on risk and where those risks might come from once a piece of software is already written. It turns out there's an additional benefit to formalising the design step in your working practices before you build anything, because you can have an opportunity to think about the risks that might be introduced by the change you make before you make it. And if it's a formal process and you've got some form of record that you did it, then that is also providing evidence in case that ever becomes necessary. Sufficient security in your system benefits everyone. The company is at less risk of fines from things like GDPR, and the fines are becoming obvious and not small. Employees are less at risk of schedule changes due to vulnerabilities being discovered and the plan being thrown out of the window and everyone being thrown onto solving a problem because a vulnerability has been discovered. Whether that's been exploited or not, whether it comes out of a penetration test before it's been exploited or whether it's actually been exploited. And obviously the customer's privacy benefits by us taking appropriate steps to achieve security in our software. What I would say about security and things like GDPR is that it's not about checkboxes. I've had a number of people say that to me, that really what we're doing is box ticking exercises and that it's not helping anyone. But I think a better way to think about it is to say that ensuring security in your software is about protecting the interests of all of the stakeholders. And as someone who works for a company, you are probably one of those people whose interest needs protecting. It's about everyone. It's about the customer, it's about the company, it's about the employees. Now those are just a couple of things that come out of design, but there are more. What you would find if you were doing design is that your communication improves in the team. A team that talks design language can communicate better and therefore be more efficient in those communications. They can talk about abstract concepts that occur at the design stage more quickly and understand one another better. It's also a way in which we can help develop people more quickly as well. It can help with training. We can more quickly bring junior developers up to speed with understanding how important organisation is and how to achieve better organisation of code, because we're talking about it more formally and we have processes in place that are making it happen. There are benefits to recognising design as important, and JB Rainsberger's video shows some of those. I recommend you watch that. There are also benefits to formalising design as part of your working practices, and I've had a lot of success with this approach and I do recommend it. But I know what you're thinking. I can hear it through the camera. Can you spare the time to do design? Isn't this more work? Well, as it happens, you can afford the time because you win back that time during the development task. And I know you won't believe that. I know that there will be people out there that don't believe that it's actually quicker. So in the next episode, I want to explore that more. In that episode, I'm going to discuss how to do design, and I want to show that through doing a demo. I want to answer the question of how we can do this efficiently. I hope you'll join me for that.